Welcome. I'm Michael Singer, author of The Untethered Soul and the Surrender Experiment, and I'd like to welcome you to our course, Living from a Place of Surrender, The Untethered Soul in Action. I'm meeting you here today in the Temple of the Universe, a place, a sanctuary of yoga and spirituality, where I have lived and practiced my practices, my spiritual practices, and taught for over 40 years now. The temple is very special, and it's a place where I learned surrender. Therefore, it's a perfectly apropos place for me to be sharing this with you. Surrender is a very deep topic. In fact, some masters of many different traditions have said that the ultimate and highest spiritual path is the path of surrender. My experience is that very few people understand surrender. They misunderstand it tremendously. They see it as a weakness. They see it as giving in to somebody else. We're going to spend this entire course, which will give us plenty of time together, not defining surrender for you, but taking you on a journey whereby you will learn surrender. There is no question in my mind that at the end of this course, you will know what surrender is. Whether you want to do it or not, that's your issue. That's another issue. Myself, I had no idea what surrender was when I started my spiritual journey. I moved out here to the woods where the temple is when I was 22, 23 years old, back in 1971, to in essence drop out. I'd gotten heavy into spirituality, into meditation and yoga, and I decided to devote my life to that. And as far as I was concerned, that is what I was going to do. I was just going to spend the rest of my time out here in the middle of the woods in solitude, meditating, doing yoga, until I achieved the states that I had experienced. I had a deep spiritual experience. I wanted to go back to that and stay there, and that was the devotion of my life. I lived that for quite some time, a couple of years, and what I found out was that it really wasn't enough. That even being out here alone in the woods with myself, I was just causing myself a lot of trouble. I didn't need other people to help. I was doing very well by myself. So for example, I'd be sitting there and I was meditating many hours a day, and there'd be a dog barking, even though I really was in the middle of nowhere. We're pretty far away from civilization out here. And the dog would bother me. And my mind would be sitting there saying, God, I made all this effort to move out in the middle of nowhere. Now there's this dog barking. Why do neighbors have their dogs bark? What am I going to do about this? Oh my God, now I'm out here and there's dogs barking. And just causing the same kind of commotion it did about people, about a dog, and about everything else. And then it started bothering me about whether I was meditating enough. You know, you committed yourself to this, you know, you shouldn't be eating so much, you should be doing it. And I just noticed that that voice inside my head, which is actually how I got on this path, by noticing there was a voice talking inside my head, and I decided I wanted to shut it up. I don't think I need to tell you about that voice. You all know about it. You have one in there bothering you. But here it was in the middle of nowhere, it's bothering me still. So I came to the point, eventually, where I realized that I can't be my own spiritual teacher. I can't make these decisions for myself, because if I'm trying to quiet down that voice in my head, it's the one who's telling me what to do. It's the one who's picking on me. It's the one that's bothering me. I didn't need any help from anybody else. So I reached a point, a very magical point in my spiritual journey. How it happened, I don't know. Call it the grace of God or whatever, where one day, and I can remember the day like it was yesterday, I took a look at myself and said, I can't do this by trying to bother myself through it, by trying to force myself through it. I need to somehow get myself out of the way. But how do I get myself out of the way when I'm in the way? And the very act of trying to get myself out of the way means I'm doing that. I'd gotten to the point of growth where anything the voice was saying, I saw as the voice. Even if it was saying, what do I do about this voice? That was still the voice talking inside my head. So I made a tremendous step forward when I decided what I needed to do was have a force stronger than me, greater than me, one that I had no control over. There was no reason to even be talking about it, because it wasn't a decision I was making. It was a force outside of me that was stronger than me. I couldn't control it, and then surrender to it. Instead of listening to my own mind with my own opinions, my concepts, my views, my preferences, my beliefs, my hopes, my dreams, all the stuff that went on inside my head, could there be something that I listened to instead of me? Well, I was living alone in the woods. I didn't have a spiritual master or anything on the body. I didn't have anyone telling me what to do. And so it was a dilemma. And it dawned on me that in truth, I really did have someone telling me what to do all the time. And that someone was life. That dog was telling me what to do. It was telling me to listen to him barking. The rain was telling me what to do. It was telling me to get wet if I'm outside. Every single event that was unfolding in life outside of me was telling me something that had nothing to do with what I wanted or didn't want. Really, what I wanted or didn't want was in opposition to what life was doing, right? That's what my wants and not wants were about. I wished it was this way. Someday I dream it'll be that way. In other words, I'm not in charge, but I want to be. But the truth is, I didn't want to be. While I was in charge, I was still there. And meditation, deep meditation, is about transcending yourself, going to a place of such deep quiet that that lower part of you, the human, noisy part of you, is not there. So realizing that life itself was actually something I could surrender to was a very, very major step for me. And I started practicing immediately. I tell this story in my second book, The Surrender Experiment. So I won't go into great detail here, but it's a fascinating story. How this young man living out in the middle of the woods just started to listen to what life was saying and actually put more credence in what life was doing than what I felt about what life was doing, whether I liked it, whether I didn't like it, whether I wanted to do it, whether I didn't want to do it. And a sequence of events unfolded to where instead of just living out here in the woods meditating, I never gave that up. I kept my morning and evening spiritual practices. I got a call out of nowheres one day where someone said to me, "We'd like you to teach this college," out of the blue. Now, events unfolded little by little that led to that, but they were not of my preference. And I didn't want to do it. Every single thing inside my head said, no, I'm living alone in the woods, meditating. I don't teach no college, right? And they literally, once when I went in for an interview, because I forced myself to do it because it had happened, somebody actually said to me, if we gave you a class at this community college, what would you teach? And I didn't say I would teach economics, which is what my doctoral program was in. I said I would teach about that voice inside your head that causes so much trouble for everybody, and I would teach what I learned about quieting it down and what life could be like. And they said, fine, we'd love you to come teach that. So I surrendered, and that began my journey as a spiritual teacher. That's where I started teaching. And one thing led to another, and the next thing I knew, because I built this temple. I was the main carpenter, the head carpenter on the temple. I'd learned to build out here when I moved out to the woods. I built a hut, and then people wanted to come out and meditate with me. So next thing I knew, we were building this temple. And I mentioned to somebody the other day that I remember very vividly when I was building the temple that my mind was bothering me, that it kept saying, there's no reason for this temple. It's a fad. People are coming out here. It was back in '75. People are coming out here, they'll stop, and you'll end up with this building in the middle of the woods. It'll rot, and you wasted nature and cut down trees, and what a terrible thing. And I just kept building. I had learned to ignore it. I was not going to listen to a word it said. This is what was happening, and this is what I was going to do. And I'm telling you, it is now 40 years later, and every single Sunday, 60, 70, 80 people have come out to this temple for services and for teachings on quieting down the mind. And so my experience is, through all of this, that the mind doesn't know what it's talking about. The personal mind has no idea what it's talking about. And we're going to get into that as part of this course, to talk about where it comes from, why it says what it says, and whether it knows what it's talking about. All I know is I used to listen to it all the time. And I found out I'm a lot better off not listening to it. And everyone I ever taught not to listen to it, or that I know learned not to listen to it, says the exact same thing. That thing doesn't know what it's talking about. After I started building, I had built the temple, people came out and started asking me to build for them. And I ended up with a construction company that was building houses. But the real big step happened when I walked into a Radio Shack store one day back in probably 79, 78, 79, and they had their first personal computer. Radio Shack was actually one of the first ones to put out a personal computer. It was nothing. It was just a tiny keyboard with a small screen, and it just fascinated me. I ran into it, and from the moment I touched it, it was like tremendous inspiration. It was like the destiny of my life. And I paid $800 and brought it home, and there were no books. There was no way to learn programming. In those days, you could walk into a bookstore. I know it's hard to believe now. There would not be a single book on computers. There was no internet, so you couldn't find one. So you taught yourself everything. And I taught myself to program. And making a long story short, if you're interested in more of it, you can read the Surrender Experiment. I ended up with a programming company. And then I ended up with a public programming company of which I was CEO. And it went through a variety of mergers, each of which was multi-billion dollar mergers. And at its peak, I had 2,300 people reporting to me from all over the country. And it was a giant company. It was a giant company. And it all started with my learning to program in that little computer. This is where life took me. That journey did not take me away from meditation. It did not take me away from my spiritual pursuits. What you notice, and I like to make that clear because a lot of people know that I have a strong business background, is I was not a businessman who got into spirituality. I was a person who devoted his entire life, every moment, every second, to spiritual ascent, to spiritual pursuits. And I never gave that up for 1 second. I did it while all of that was happening. But it's not like that was in the way of it happening. That became my path and my spiritual growth. The meditations morning and evening kept me centered, kept that clear, but didn't take long for me to realize that the flow of life, especially where it put me, was going to hit my stuff. There was going to be insecurities, there was going to be fears, there was going to be all kinds of stuff. Whatever was left, you're sitting there working with a company and people and all that of that size, you're going to get challenged as to whether you're willing to let go of yourself. And I never forgot, I'm serious, I'm looking at you, I never forgot for a moment that the entire purpose of every moment of this was letting go of myself. So I used the events in the real world, in the outside world, that were unfolding, right? Relationships, business, all of it, any of it, to cleanse, to release. So that is what we're going to talk about. That is the path of surrender. It's often been called the pathless path because you can't put your finger on it, but it puts its finger on you, all right? If you're open, it is going to hit you. And the question is, are you willing to let it take what it's hitting? And that becomes the basis of what surrender is. So surrender is nothing to be afraid of. It's not surrender to somebody else's will. It's not surrendering your right to experience life. It is the willingness to surrender a part of your being that you don't need, that's holding you down. It is actually the cause of all problems. So that is the basis of the course. We're going to go way beyond the 2 books I've written. We're going to go very deep in this course. And I'm really honored to be here with you. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it so much that I'm going to stop with this introduction and I'll meet you over on session 1.